Okay, welcome everybody to the opening event of our third season of andPlay in Conversation. We are so excited to be here today with Shepherdess, an incredible violin voice duo of Hajnal Pivnick and Kayleigh Butcher. And uh, andPlay in Conversation, if you haven't been with us before, is our audience engagement series where we really allow you to get an inside look at the people we collaborate with, the musicians we admire, the artistic practices that we are interested in. And so this year, the series is really about the duo. Maya and I, as a duo, have always thought it is the coolest ensemble. It is easy, it's functionable, it's like easy to work with, and it builds such an interesting relationship between the two people because there's only two of you in the room. So this season, we will be talking to four other duos, and we're so excited to hear what their experiences are like. andPlay in Conversation is made possible in part with public funds from Creative Engagement, supported by the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, in partnership with the City Council and the New York State Council of the Arts. So we are so thankful for their support and also for the support of Word Up Community Bookshop, which is one of our community partners, and we'll be talking about them a little bit later. So welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. It's so exciting to talk to you too, because yeah, like we were saying, we've been talking so much about the duo relationship, and just recently a friend of ours asked us, like, how did you two meet? And it was kind of a fun story to tell our two sides of the tale. So we wanted to ask you, like, how did you two meet, and what were your impressions of the other person?
Kayleigh, do you want to go first?
We totally didn't prepare for this because I was so excited to hear what Hajnal would say without like any sort of reminding prior to. I can totally start. Okay. I have a horrible memory, so there are going to be gaps. But what I remember is that someone, no idea who it was, Jen Jolly recommended that I talk to Hajnal about a project that Quince, another ensemble I'm a part of, was doing. And so Hajnal and I met for coffee in New York at like a tea place that was like kind of near her neighborhood, or her old neighborhood. And it was so fun. We got along super well. The project didn't end up happening, but we like stayed in touch. And then I was asked by Lucy DeGray to be a part of a Resonant Bodies Festival like a year or 2 years later. And I wanted to do something with other people, collaborations with choreographers, I think, and new composers. And Daniel Felsenfeld wrote a piece for voice and violin called The Sand Pit. And I was like, Hajnal is going to play that. And then the piece wasn't done in time, so we couldn't perform it. And that was such a bummer. But then we like kind of talked afterwards, and it was like, we're going to do this like for real, right? We're just like going to continue doing this. You know, it was not even like a large conversation. It was just an assumption like, oh yeah, this makes sense. Let's do this. So that's my, that's my angle.
Yeah. I mean, I don't feel like there really are gaps in that, but I will say that, so my like side of it is I remember Kayleigh reaching out, and I think that she had just moved to New York. And I think that she was, just kind of like making connections and like going based off of recommendations of like people that she had either like known about or had been recommended. And we went to the tea shop. Oh, it's so wonderful. It doesn't exist in this location anymore, but it's called Serengeti Teas. And it's now a tea shop and a restaurant on 125th Street around like Lexington, I believe. So kind of like East Harlem. And they have the best teas that are all sourced from Africa. And, the owner proprietor is there often giving really amazing recommendations. I miss it so much. And I love tea so much, so much. And so we met, and I remember my impression of Kayleigh was like, I felt like this was a kindred spirit, you know, like we're both very type A, we're both very like proactive and organized and like just kind of operating on a very similar wavelength, which I think is an interesting thing that we can maybe like delve into later. Like, how does that work as a duo, you know, because you, in a lot of relationships, you kind of have that alpha beta situation between two people. And like, when you're both kind of alphas, like, how does that work? Like, you know, how does that work in a duo? And I mean, I guess the spoiler alert is that it works really well for us. You know, I don't think that we've really ever clashed on anything. So I think that our like organizational side really, really mitigates any reason if there would ever be a clash between both being very proactive about something and having strong opinions. When Kayleigh asked me to be a part of Time Spans, I was a part of Resonant Bodies Festival. I was really, really excited because I love the work that Lucy did with the festival. And I thought it was a really awesome opportunity to come in and do violin voice. So yeah, I think that, you know, fast forward past what Kayleigh had already said about why things didn't work out with that performance, we definitely both really wanted to move forward with working together. And we kind of said, you know, what is something that is really important to us? And one thing that we wanted to do was expanding repertoire for violin and voice that goes beyond like art song. You know, there's a lot of music out there for violin and voice that's very much like the singer's doing art song and the violin is doing like accompanying music. And so we really wanted to do something a little bit more experimental and something a little bit more chamber music, where we both have equal voices. And so then, you know, the magical funding fairies came and blessed us, and we got a New Music USA grant to bring some of our rep down to Memphis, which is where I'm from. So we rehearsed and then, you know, went down there as part of the Opera Memphis festival and did a concert. And then we were like, this is really fun. Let's keep doing this. And now here we are. And so we just have kind of collectively reached out to our networks and people that we really admire and, you know, asking people to write for us. And it's been really, really fun kind of building our repertoire in that way.
That's really interesting. I mean, to very condense things, I mean, Maya and I knew each other for a while, but then we ended up playing one concert together and then had the same feeling of like, oh, this really clicks. Like this is something that we could keep doing that would be worth doing. Mm-hmm. And I think that's like so important with the duo, because with even like an larger ensemble, like a quartet, you might have shifting members or people leave and people come. And we joke sometimes about like kicking each other out of the duo, but like there wouldn't be andPlay if one of us left. So like you couldn't replace 50% of a 2-person ensemble and still have the ensemble. And so it is such a special partnership that can only exist in that way. And so I think finding that other person is like the most important part.
Because personality really comes through, and I think that like you hear that in how the duo plays, and like you send us your recordings and it's like you really hear that like they're the two personalities like playing together, and like it wouldn't work in I don't know, different people. Yeah, it's just really beautiful.
It did make me think that, I think because you guys you just got to Avaloq Farm Music Institute, which is like our favorite place that we were just at a couple weeks ago. But when you were talking about having the same personality type, I was remembering a couple of years ago at Avaloq, we were taking personality tests. Do you remember this, Maya? Because Hannah
like
Collins was really into it. Yeah, like all the different ones. And it's interesting that you guys say you really match, because I think in some ways Maya and I are different. That like we're very complementary to each other. I think that we each we definitely connect on many levels, and are on the same wavelengths, but then there are different areas that we excel at. And I think that is like why our ensemble works sometimes. Because she's like, I've got this big dream. And I'm like, well, I mean, can it really happen? And then eventually we get to the middle where I'm like, I'm on board with the dream and this is how we make it happen. But that like there's something, it's interesting to hear of an ensemble that maybe functions a little differently, where you guys seem to really match in terms of that.
Well, and I, to be honest, and Hajnal disagree with me, I will, we can fight on this. This can be our first argument, recorded. But I don't think we're the same Myers-Briggs. I wouldn't say that we're the same Myers-Briggs.
We will have to find out and get back to you in the interview notes.
There you go.
It's just interesting to think about how like these really close partnerships can exist in so many different ways, right? And there's not like a cookie cutter of like what makes a great duo partnership, and that it is, like Maya said, just like so personality driven, and it's just finding that right person.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, truth.
And so you started to talk a little bit, Hajnal, about commissioning, right? And building this repertoire, which is something that we also really based our ensemble on, is expanding this repertoire. But could you both talk a little bit about how you started to make those decisions, how you decided what the artistic vision of the group was going to be?
So I believe at the beginning, it started with Joel Thompson. And was there another composer at the beginning as well that we had?
That sounds, Joel feels like the impetus for me.
Right.
For sure.
So I think that I had heard about Joel. I don't even know if I had met him at this point, but he had written the last songs for the Unarmed. I'll need to like check what the exact title is. But this incredible choral orchestral piece based off of last words of unarmed Black men that had been killed by the police. And I had heard a lot about this piece, and it had actually been performed in Memphis, and that's how I kind of heard about it. And I was like, this composer is incredible and has an incredible voice, and has this precedent of writing for voice. And so I was really interested in reaching out to him, and he was excited to write for us, and agreed to write for us. So he wrote this piece, this really incredible piece called After for us. And, we had gotten funding from New Music USA. So we made a video for it and recorded it and performed it several times. I think we gave the premiere in Memphis, I believe. Mm-hmm. And so that kind of started the commissioning process. And I think that being once you get the grant, that's great. You have money to commission, but most new ensembles don't necessarily have the seed money. And once that first commission was done, it was like, all right, now we kind of have to like just go based off of like ticket sales and like out of pocket. And so at the early part, I think many groups will agree that composers are kind of, taking a chance on you. Like, you're like, I can offer you like 10% of what you're actually worth, but I am gonna, like, in return, I promise that I'm gonna make a high quality recording and perform it a lot. So I think that, it's the goal is to build a sustainable model where you can be commissioning composers for what they're worth. But when you're starting out, you have to figure out like, what is the best way that I can serve this music if I'm not able to pay the composer everything that I want to pay them. So we're starting to figure out what that sustainable model will look like. Like, how can we get more funding and make sure that we're commissioning for the amount that, is equitable.
And for the, you were saying earlier that a lot of what you wanted to do was make sure that you're creating actually chamber music for this instrumentation, and that you don't want it to be like the voice is the soloist, and here is Hajnal just noodling away on her violin. But is that something that you convey to the composers that you're commissioning, or do you feel like you're approaching composers who already have that, or how do you kind of get your artistic vision across to the people you're commissioning?
We definitely say verbatim, we want this to be equitable, not just, like the people that you see as a part of this festival, but also just musically what's happening is equal. And I've been a part of so many ensembles and or projects where, the performer, or sorry, the musicians, the instrumentalists are first on stage and then the singer comes out, but it's like so much an ensemble piece. Like I've done that for Music for 18 Musicians. There's no reason for the vocalists to come off or to come out like last. That doesn't make sense to me. And I'm more interested, I would say, in being a part, like not being a soloist. I've always been and identified as a chamber musician. That is what I'm interested in. So when Hajnal and I were talking about it, we were just like, yeah, no, this can't be like an art song. Like she is not my backup. I am not her backup. We have to be like on the same page. So when we're communicating with composers, I think we've been talking about it long enough that it is sort of maybe assumed, but we do talk about it a lot as far as like what their aesthetic is and what they're interested in writing, because they're also equal artists and we don't want to sort of impede on their ideas and goals for themselves. So it is kind of like a balancing act, but we do try and stress like no one is a soloist here. There can be a soloist section maybe, but like overall it's us together.
Are you generally working with composers who've already worked with voice before, or have you ever just taken a chance on someone that you just like love their music but you've never heard anything with voice? Because I feel like that's such an interesting, we've thought about that a lot with strings, and I wonder if you're thinking about that with voice, because it's a new component.
I would say, I mean, the going back to like how we choose who we commission to, we like have this ongoing list of our dream people, and not all of them have written for voice before by any means. I think something that I've experienced in the various voice projects that I'm a part of is that whenever people are writing something really rhythmically interesting or complex, whenever they have to write for voice, that completely disappears for whatever reason. And we don't have to go into details on why, but it does. And so that is also something I think that we talk about is like, if you want to write something hard, please write something hard. If you want to write something really rhythmic and fast, like we are game to do that. So yeah, it's definitely not always someone who's written for voice before. And I would say that I personally am more intrigued by getting someone to write for voice for the first time for us than someone who's experienced doing it.
And I will say, I definitely I do get excited when I know that a composer plays the violin. I'll like admit it. I'll admit it. Like I get excited because I'm like, this person really gets me. But yeah, I mean, I think that it's definitely like and now we're starting to look at existing rep as well, because we want to build out our repertoire so that we can have some time to grow the funds to be able to do a proper commission. And so it's tricky, but like looking and seeing like which composers do you know that write for voice? It's very it's easy to get like pigeonholed when you're a composer into like, I write for band or I'm a vocal composer. So to find somebody that kind of does more of a broad palette with their writing for this instrumentation.
Yeah, I think anytime you're commissioning, it's always a bit of a risk, right? That you're like putting some money or putting some time, you're putting whatever you're doing into this imaginary piece that you hope will turn out to be something that is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there are the things that you can be like have senses that something is going to be more fruitful than others. But I think we've also been surprised at times when we think that something will really come out in a certain way, and it totally doesn't. But I think that that's just part of playing new music too, is that there kind of are the like tons of hits and some misses, and it's what happens with all music. And because we're playing contemporary music, we're experiencing it all. Um,
Professional risk takers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Adrenaline junkies inducing.
Yes.
An extreme sport.
Yeah.
That's where like the dream list like really becomes very handy, because like you can always reference the dream list and be like, oh, like especially like then to look at like perhaps some older dreams and like that you're still excited about, but you're like, oh, I hadn't thought about this, and like their voice has really changed over time, and like I wonder how that would change the piece that they wrote for our instrumentation or whatever. Just yeah, it's an exciting process.
Yeah,
but,
we always. Oh, go Maya.
Oh no. Well, I was gonna ask if you like have any pieces that you feel like are like that you've commissioned that just feel like quintessentially Shepherdess, like just feel like very you, and like you when you play them you feel home, or like
I thought you were gonna make a joke and say quintessentially.
Totally made that joke and said that ensemble 100%. Quintessential.
I mean, I absolutely love Bethany Young's.
I knew it. I knew you were gonna say it. Yeah.
I just absolutely love her compositional voice. I love her whimsy. I love how challenging her music is, but then it just like really fits. I did a piece of hers that is for vocalists, like it's like any speaking person can do it. You don't have to be able to sing. And there's this one movement that's so rhythmically complex that I like put it in this like percussion app. Like I put in the whole, like every meter was different. It's like 3/16, 7/8, like it just changed it, and it's very fast. And I remember I just like put it in and just looped it and was like practicing the words to it. But that's like really fun and rewarding. For me, I don't know, again, like a glutton for punishment. But yeah, Bethany's Where Waste Piles is, I think, quintessentially Shepherdess.
And that's one of the pieces you're sharing today, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about it?
And so this piece that she wrote for us is I play the violin on a bench in front of me, and I use a tuning fork, like a metal tuning fork, and a screw, like a long threaded screw. And kind of like hammering away at the violin, I have to use like a secondary instrument because it shreds my strings. But I love the piece so much that I'm okay with that. Like I just like keep the shredded strings for this piece. And I'm kind of doing a lot of different techniques that Bethany was experimenting with, and her scores are beautiful too, just how she visualizes the motions that you're going to do and the sounds you're going to create. It's like very intuitive and just really beautiful to even just look at. And it's a lot of interplay between Kayleigh and myself, and a lot of mimicking sounds, and this kind of beautiful, almost feels like slide guitar at some point. Like it's just this very like metallic, like swishy movement that's happening, and very like mechanical, metallic, really beautiful timbres that are coming out from this this extended technique that she's created for the work. So that's kind of the violin perspective of the piece.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost exclusively extended techniques. There's only a few times where I feel like I'm egressively singing out. The rest is almost entirely ingressive, which, so by the end of the piece, we always, whenever we're programming it, I'm like, we have to program this last because I cannot sing after. It's like so intense in the best way. So yeah, it's a badass piece that I love.
Bethany Young also, we commissioned her a couple years ago, and it's funny. Her piece is very different for us in that it's like totally aggression. It is very intense, and so we can't usually speak after it because we've been screaming so much. So it's maybe less of the whimsy, but it's still very Bethany in the way that it is constructed.
Yeah,
she's hardcore. She's like heavy metal, hardcore industrial, you know. as a composer in some ways.
But I definitely think, you know, the word whimsy is true. Like there's this very like earthy, whimsical goth vibe with like how she approaches music, you know, like it feels very organic, but it's also like showing the like metal side of nature. Like if there was like a nature metal band, I think she'd be in it.
Nearly empty vessel, the head leaking from iris, trickling down our breasts, our nipples where waste piles into fine layers of lost causes of black bile. Nearly empty vessel, the head leaking from iris, trickling down our breasts, our nipples where waste piles into fine layers of lost causes of black bile. Trickling down our breasts, down, our nipples, breast, our, where, waist, piles. Waste. Defined. Layers. Pile. In. Of lost. Black. Fine. Bile. Nearly empty vessel, the head leaking from our ears, trickling down our breasts, our nipples, where waste piles into fine layers of lost causes of black bile. Defined layers of lost causes. Piles in defined layers of lost causes of black bile.
And you guys are sharing another piece today, which I would assume also feels very representative of the ensemble.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is Evan's piece, right? I actually.
No, I think it's Yaz.
Yes.
Oh, it's
Yes.
Yaz.
Yeah.
There it is. I was like,
Yeah.
I love Evans, but Yaz, yeah, absolutely. They apologize. They wrote this piece for us right when the pandemic started. Am I correct? Like that was a nuts time, and Yaz was able to find some time to write in all of the kind of craziness. And what I love about this particular piece is that it's semi-improvised, at least in my part. I actually can't remember in the violin part. I think it's a little improv for you as well. But I have to tell a childhood story so that every time we a positive, happy childhood memory, let me be specific, that it's different every time we perform it now. And of course we're sharing the video, so it's kind of immortal in this childhood story. But I do try and figure out other happy childhood memories to do whenever we recorded it actually for the album that's coming out soon as well, and it's slightly different. So yeah, it's really beautiful to do, and it's not necessarily measured. It's measured, I guess, in timings rather than actual measures.
Cool. That's such an interesting thing, and we've had it come up a couple times too, where pieces that are written for duo feel so personalized. And I guess this one's a little different because you are telling your own story that you can choose then. But the idea of really incorporating the people, like we had a piece written by us that was totally based on locations that we commute to, like it tracks kind of our commutes for a specific amount of time. And another piece that like Leah Asher's piece that was really inspired by letters that people wrote to themselves, and these pieces that feel like, I think composers kind of see the duo and get so inspired by the two individuals there in a way that doesn't happen when you're writing for a much larger ensemble.
And it's really beautiful in the part where Kayleigh is improvising the childhood memory. I'm given a set of pitches to improvise around, and so it's really nice to every time the piece feels very fresh because I'm hearing maybe a variation of a story I've heard before, and I'm responding to Kayleigh's personal account. And there is this really beautiful innocence of the piece. And I think that this was the first piece that either of us played with another human being coming out of the pandemic. We met outdoors in the boat basin on the west side.
Yeah.
And, we found this really beautiful open space, and I had gone location scouting, and because Kayleigh lives in Brooklyn and I was living in Manhattan then, and I was, 8 months pregnant. And I was just like, I have a lot of really sentimental, personal connection to this piece as well. Like that, I know I would love the piece regardless of how we first started playing it together, but I have all of these memories attached to it, of it being the first piece that I played with another person that wasn't the person I live with. And the first piece that I played like outdoors with people around, and that feeling of like timid emergence coming out of the pandemic, and also, being pregnant and like about to go through such a big life change. And like having that nostalgia of that time before giving birth. Like, it's just, there's a lot of really beautiful sentiment attached to the work. So I think it also is a beautiful contrast to the intensity of Bethany's piece as well. Like, it's really nice to kind of have a pause and really just sink into the piece and just like meditate while you're playing it. Yeah. And I think that Yaz does a really wonderful job with their compositional voice in that aspect.
to me, it's so nice to hear another duo kind of talking about this like really well thought out artistic vision that you're like really trying to shape the ensemble, make like bigger changes in how your instruments are viewed, how the instrumentation is viewed. And I think that's something that we talk about all the time, because I think our instruments can often get stuck in that not chamber music role as well with just two of them. And I was like, I don't want to just play a bass line. Like, what do you?
And I'm like the melody. Like,
Yeah. And so, like, we always
Yeah.
talk about how we have this commissioning philosophy of more than. Like, we want composers to write things that sound like more than just a violin and a viola. So we were like looking for not even just like chamber music, but like the creation of something new, some new um, sound world. Like you can imagine a third instrument emerging from them. And that's something that I think so many of these composers do really well. And so I think also like the piece we are sharing today is, what did we go with?
Anthony Vine's piece.
Yeah. And so Maya, do you want to talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, so we're going to share a piece by Anthony Vine called Terrain, which is this piece. It's 11 minutes. It's a timed piece. And it's where we have paper clips on two of our strings each, and then we're playing with our bow at the end of our violin, so at the nut of the violin. And it just creates this like totally ethereal sound world that you get to like hang out in for 11 minutes, and you like don't know who's really playing what. I can hardly tell what I'm playing and like what Hannah's playing. And it really like he worked with our instruments in a different way, and it was really exciting. Yeah, it's a nice piece to play. It's one of the things we like to set a scene. It's like it's a good opener where it's like, let's like get everyone with us. Like everyone's just like we pull them in, and then we can bring you to other worlds too. But it's just a nice like, okay, we're here, like let's all be together kind of piece.
Awesome.
I'm wondering if we've talked a lot about today, like the things that can be so special about the duo, and just wondering if you have any brief thoughts about like how if you approach what you're doing differently in the duo as opposed to a larger ensemble, like if there are any other differences that you kind of have thought of that we haven't mentioned today.
I will also say, just in playing together, it is a really, so it's almost like this trust fall, when you're playing with one other person, because you are each other's sound worlds. And so like if there is a continuation of sound, it's like you're relying on each other to really understand where the person is feeling their phrasing in a way that is so much more exposed than if you're playing in a larger grouping. And I think that following the breath of a singer is something that we always like strive to emulate as string players. It's always like, sing it, or like, and to actually be working with somebody who is a singer, it's like, it's a really beautiful exercise as a string player to like feel the organic shape of things that come from the breath. That you can breathe when you're playing, but when you're playing with someone who's relying on their breath for sound, that's something that I think is really wonderful in this duo setting. And I think that it is, you're focusing all of your attention either on what you're doing or the other person. You're not like darting around to other people that you have to connect with. Like it's only that person and what you're doing. So I think that that's a really unique thing as a duo to experience.
Yeah, I really love the trust fall metaphor that you
Yeah.
painted. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me, that it is just it's a close relationship, but you're fully dependent on each other to a certain extent. There's no one else out there.
Yeah.
You gotta pick the
I
right
definitely feel like I think about tuning in such a different way when it's just us as well, just because the timbres are so different. Like it's still very difficult for me to match pitch sometimes to a string instrument, just because it's just totally different timbre. And so I feel like it's really helping my ear in such an interesting way, in a positive way. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
Totally.
Well, and we know you have to run in a minute, but thank you so much for being here with us today. And as a very last question, we just wanted to ask you, because we usually have these events live. Well, we haven't had for like 2 years, but before the pandemic, we had these events live at this like beautiful, wonderful little bookstore in Washington Heights. Which is such a special place. It's a bilingual bookstore, and we'll have the link down there. But we just wanted to know, because we still really want to support them, if you guys have any book recommendations for the audience, and we will leave some links down there where you can buy from this bookstore online if you are so inspired.
That's awesome. I've heard of Word Up.
Yeah.
I used to live in Inwood.
Yeah. It's a great community kind of cultural center.
Totally.
I cracked open my Goodreads because I used to keep like really good track of the books that I read. And I was looking at it says from over 10 years ago, my ratings. I like would write little messages, like comments under my ratings of what I liked about the book. I was very into that. So a book that kind of stood out that I really, really loved, and this was before I even lived in New York, it's called Garlic and Sapphires: The Secret Life of a Critic in Disguise. So it was a New York Times food critic that would go to restaurants like in like incognito, because if they would recognize her, they would like put on better service. So she never wanted to be recognized. And she would go to all these like hidden gems or like greatest hits of New York City and talk about how she had been treated as someone that they didn't recognize. So I would recommend that book.
Sounds really interesting. I'll check that one out.
Yeah, I've never heard of that one. During the pandemic, I lived by myself. So I have had tons of time to read and get back into reading, which I'm super thankful for. So I've been thankfully reading a ton of books. I will say that the first book I read of the pandemic was Chanel Miller's Know My Name, which is actually super sort of relevant to a piece that Hajnal and I play called After, the Joel Thompson piece, which is, when we first premiered it, we didn't know Chanel Miller's name, but she is the survivor of Brock Turner at Stanford University. And then she came out with her book, Know My Name, shortly before the pandemic, before the shutdown. And I freaked out and like read that book front to back in, just a couple days. It was a beautifully written, very sad, very intense, very scary, very, I think, important book. So I highly recommend that one.
Thank you both for those recommendations. Yeah, we'll share those down in the notes along with maybe some other recommendations from andPlay.
Yeah.
But thank you so much.
So much for
Thank you.
joining us. What a
Thank
joy.
you for having us.
Talk to you all day.
Yeah,
we never get to talk about our duo.
I know.
Now thank you for this opportunity.
It has to be like a longer thing now. I feel like we need to have a nice outdoor meal or a shared concert.
Can you guys just come up to Avaloq real quick?
Yeah, we'll be there in about 6 hours. See you. Maya, you gotta.
I'll tell Pete you're coming.
Yeah, tell them we're on our way. Great. Well, thank you so much, and thanks for joining this andPlay conversation. And we will see you next time.
Thank you.